as part of celebrating those achievements of our Virginia planning nominations, we want to not just bring this good work to those of you who were with us at the conference in Richmond earlier this year, but to our wider audience around the Commonwealth. We, as part of that awards program each year, we convene a group of your peers that assemble as our awards committee, and they work with the Vice President of External Affairs, myself, and others on reviewing nominations from across the state. And the criteria is fairly simple for the different awards categories. We're looking for excellence that helps planners plan, helps Virginia plan, making planning and planners matter, meeting your membership needs, as well as getting planners involved and making great places happen. Without further ado, I'll turn things over to our first presenter today. It'll be Richard Lawrence with the City of Alexandria, discussing the Landmark Mall redevelopment project, which was our Red Clay Development of the Year award winner. Richard, take it away.
Let me unmute myself. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining this webinar. I'm going to spend the next couple moments walking through the Landmark Mall case study and why we think it's a great example of transformative redevelopment that we experienced here in Alexandria, Virginia, and how maybe some of the tools that we utilize could be replicated across the Commonwealth and maybe elsewhere across the US, because this is not a unique scenario. I think if you drive across the US, you will find a landmark mall of your own, an underperforming strip mall or a shopping mall that is in need of kind of new life and new birth. And this is just an example of what we were able to kind of achieve. We're going to talk a bit about the process of how we were able to redevelop the site, and talk a little bit more about the details and the mechanics of financing, as well as the urban design components of the landmark site. So joined with me is Jeff Farner, who's the Deputy Director of the Department of Planning and Zoning, and we will entertain some questions from the audience once we conclude. So just to give some context, Alexandria is located just outside of the nation's capital. It experiences many of the same and similar growth pressures that comes with being part of a major metropolitan region: density, housing, transformation impact, et cetera. And so the city is approximately 15 square miles with a population of approximately 160,000 residents, and continuing to grow as the region grows. As shown by the little star in the Alexandria context, that's the location of Landmark Mall. And as you can see on the graphic to the bottom right of your screen, it is a landlocked parcel, we would say. It is captured by the north by a major interstate, I-395, and then along the south and the eastern portions of the site are two major thoroughfares. We have Duke Street that serves as a regional connector and thoroughfare connecting folks from Fairfax County to our west, and 2 points north as well as south through the city. And then we have North Van Dorn Street, which is another major arterial road. And so the redevelopment of Landmark Mall in and of itself was a creative challenge as we as a city looked to how to integrate the site through redevelopment into the rest of the community. And so just a little bit of history and context about Landmark Mall. It was originally developed as an open air mall in about 1965. It's a 52-acre site, which was at its heyday, the first mall in the DC region to feature the three major anchors. So we had a Macy's, we had a Sears, we had a JCPenney. So Landmark was the hit place to go and became a regional draw for shoppers and a regional activity center. So it was a very highly utilized mall, but as you are aware, retail exchange over time, user preference change. And so beginning in the 1980s, the Landmark Mall, which was open air, began the process of enclosing or becoming an enclosed mall, undergoing a series of renovations And by 1990, it kind of reopened as a fully enclosed mall, which is kind of consistent with some of the malls that you see now, where they're kind of fully encapsulated. But structural changes in the department, as I mentioned, they had the three major department stores, Macy's, Sears, JCPenney, which also kind of turned to Lord & Taylor at the time. Those department store industry changes threatened the survival of the anchor mall beginning in the 1990s and then advancing through the 2000s. So the traditional mall concept was slowly becoming outdated, and user preferences of shopping online became more popular. And so the concept of a suburban mall and its long-term prosperity began to become challenged. And so increased vacancy plagued the mall beginning in the 2010s. The mall subsequently closed in 2017. And during that time, the city had been thinking about how we would start thinking about how to redevelop Landmark Mall in the future. Some interesting things that we were able to do with Landmark Mall following its permanent closure in 2017 was we were thinking creatively of how to use this interim building as a creative use or an adaptive use in the interim as the market pressures and the market caught up to the development pressures of the West End. And so one of the kind of unique uses that the mall was able to achieve was it served as an interim homeless shelter for a temporary basis while the homeless shelter on the east side of the city, known as Carpenter Shelter, was under reconstruction. And so the users of Carpenter Shelter were relocated temporarily to the Landmark Mall site, which served as a temporary homeless shelter during that period. And fun fact, Landmark Mall was also the site of the Wonder Woman 2 1984 film. So if you see those opening credit scenes with the mall and Wonder Woman flying down, that was in Landmark Mall. And so as it looked in 1984 was how it essentially looked in the 2000s, precipitating the need for change and renovation. And so in 2009, there began a for the Landmark site as part of the Landmark and Dorn Quarter Plan. It was an amendment to the 1992 and really was a four-sector plan that ended not just the development of the Landmark Mall site, but the major parcels and all the parcels that were along that North Van Dorn corridor to create, to address a few issues, transportation, and create a transit network that would support the region, as well as identify density and a land use mix that would kind of retrofit the suburban portion of the city into a more urban, walkable, and pedestrian-oriented neighborhood. Following about 10 years of inactivity, again, this was a planning process that looked for the future redevelopment and vision of the area for about a 15 to 20-year horizon. The market was still experiencing some lack of interest in the West End. And so through multiple kind of development proposals that didn't really come to fruition, as well as ownership changes on the Landmark Mall site, the city underwent another planning process in 2019, specifically focused on the Landmark Mall site. As the major landowner at the time, which was Howard Hughes, was anticipating or actively trying to redevelop the parcel, and working with the community to establish what that community vision for a more updated Landmark Mall would be. And then lastly, the kind of next tier to the planning process came in the form of what we call a coordinated development district in Alexandria and a master plan amendment, which focuses specifically on the entitlements for redeveloping the site. And so some of the major planning themes that consistently came about through the various iterations of our planning and our community engagement outreach were connectivity and mobility, thinking of how to connect Landmark to the surrounding community. As I mentioned, it was kind of isolated by all of the major arterial roads. how to integrate transit and transportation improvements into and throughout the landmark mall site, integrating public open spaces and parks to make it a green and livable community and neighborhood, and creating a vibrant mix of land uses that would serve as a point of activation in a regional center and create a sense of place for the new neighborhood. As part of all of our kind of community outreach and our planning efforts, we try to find creative solutions to integrate affordable housing into the overall land use mix, as well as addressing and identifying community needs in facilities and infrastructure, and then integrating sustainability and resilience into the overall framework and footprint for the future redevelopment. And so what we arrived at, particularly through all these levels of community outreach, was a community benefits package that was included in the CDD rezoning, which really was anchored by the Inova Hospital campus on the western portion of the site. It included a new fire station, which presented the opportunity for co-location of affordable housing. An estimated $13.8 million for affordable housing contributions, which would estimate to about 245 on-site affordable units, as well as some home ownership units as well. What we do uniquely here in Alexandria is what we call developer contributions, which is a calculation that we quantify based on the assessed value or the potential assessed value of the rezoning, and then what would be the developer share of contributing to community benefits. A portion of those benefits are going to be used for transportation improvements to facilitate the transportation hub, as well as bike and improvements, and the provision of additional open space, about 3 acres of open space, as well as establishing sustainability and performance requirements for the project as it moves forward. And so at this point, I'll transition over to Jeff Farner, who can continue talking about the project.
So thank you, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone. And I think as Richard mentioned in the beginning part of his presentation, I think our goal today is we are all struggling with shopping centers, enclosed or unenclosed shopping centers, and how we integrate them back into our communities, particularly as Richard pointed out, those retail uses are changing. As Richard showed earlier, this site was very much intentionally separated from the community with roads and infrastructure, and we had a process to stitch this site back into our city and the fabric of our city, and I think we're all struggling with those types of topics. So just a sort of high level overview, this is an image of the site itself as was planned, and a couple important pieces here. We initially started conversations about redevelopment and we knew we needed an anchor for this site. And also during that process, the hospital Inova Hospital that's located in our city was talking about expansion, and they had challenges with their existing site. And so we worked with them to actually relocate to the Landmark Mall site as one of the anchors, in addition to the retail and other uses that I'm going to mention. And that's really important when you talk about a 52-acre site of having day and nighttime population. In many ways, the Inova Hospital functions like an office, and we all know the challenges that commercial office is facing today in terms of occupancy and locating. So just a little bit of overview. The site is about 5.6 million square feet. The hospital itself is about 1 million square feet. Roughly 2,500 residential units, 3.5 acres of new parks, and the hearings for the buildings, the first phase of buildings, which I'm going to mention, is expected to be in front of the Planning Commission and City Council in December of this year. So the next slide is sort of a zoom in of that planning level document that you saw in the previous slide. And one of the things that we talked about with the developer was the importance of creating a place. One of the challenges when you have a site this big is how do you create enough critical mass so a site has an identity early on. And we worked with the developer to create enough, we believe enough critical mass with the redevelopment of the private sector development as well as the hospital, so that you'll be able to go there. It will feel like a place. It will have enough buildings, enough parks constructed in early phases to feel like a place. The other thing that's pointed out conceptually here is the different typologies and different uses. There's multifamily rental, there's ownership opportunities, there's senior housing, there's townhouses, so that in theory, the site can be redeveloped more quickly, which helps with placemaking in terms of variety of uses and building heights, but it also helps with the funding structure that was put into place with this site, which I'll mention in some of the later slides. So the next slide is about design. Design is important in our city and all of your jurisdictions and communities that you live. Of how do we think about creating a new place? How do we think about the identity? We are generally known as a historic city, but this is an area of our city that is, we think there's an opportunity to have more modern contemporary architecture, still with nods back to who we are as a city and what our DNA is. And you see some of the renderings here around the central green. And the next slide really talks about open space and the importance of open space on this site. So during the planning process, the upper image in the upper left was one of the things that we talked about early on was this sort of, we call it the green spine, which was open space outside the hospital. And they're actually working through the development review process to integrate healing gardens, health. Health is also an identity in the open space, both around the hospital, but also in the greens. This is also all public, either owned by the city or a public access easement. And we felt very strongly that the open spaces that are in the community should be open to the public. We are all having conversations about equity and how you make that happen. And I think open spaces are one of the great communal civic spaces that whether they're owned by the city or have a public access easement, they should be open to everyone, whether you're living here, shopping here, or just wanting to visit. So big piece of the community, and they're actually constructing those parks as part of the first phase. So the sort of next thing that I think we struggled with a lot, candidly, and I'm going to go over this fairly high level, and then hopefully we can answer some questions of how do you make this work? Because one of the challenges with redeveloping a shopping center, particularly this shopping center for us, was there was a lot of infrastructure. You needed to tear down a 1 million square foot building. You needed to tear down infrastructure. You needed to build back the infrastructure in the parks all before you deliver your first buildings, i.e. revenue generation. So one of the things we identified early in our planning process is that the city would need to participate. And I think as you are thinking about your planning processes and future retail development, think about where or if your jurisdiction can participate. That's going to be important, and you can't participate in all the redevelopment sites. So we prioritize this as a catalyst for properties around it. And what's interesting is we're already seeing the side effect of that. We're seeing development happen around it, adjacent to it, that is spurred by the market and the uses that are coming to Landmark Mall. So high level, one of the things our previous city manager used to say is, but for the city's involvement, this project would not happen. And this mall was actually vacant when we were going through the planning process for all the reasons that Richard outlined that we can talk about more in the Q&A. So a couple of things needed to happen to enable this project to move forward. Was a $54 million grant to the city from the IDA, our Industrial Development Authority, essentially to buy land and parking space rights. Also an $86 million to fund on-site and off-site infrastructure, essentially to enable the development to start happening. The city investments are to be repaid with the estimated $1 billion in new tax revenue. So that's important. That this site was vacant, it was essentially off the tax rolls. We're putting it back on the tax rolls, and through that tax increment process, those revenues will be repaid. We did an extensive financial analysis looking at viability and risk and what happens. And we took a fairly conservative approach. And we believe this amount can be repaid, and it will be repaid. And the developer has expectations through our agreement to deliver certain finances in a certain time. So big takeaway, in my opinion, is these sites are really hard to redevelop. That's why you don't see many of them. City participated. It was extensive. It was a very complicated financial analysis and agreement, but it's ultimately happening, and the project's under construction as we speak. So slide 14, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Richard, is process. Be very clear with the community, your political leaders, of what the expectation is in that process. And I think that's one of the things our city did through this process, is the community was very clear about expectations of affordable housing, communal open space, etc. And that was built into our process. The other challenge, and we all face this, including me, is we all have great things we want to do. And sites like this, because of the economic challenges, you can't do everything. And so what are the priorities of the community of the jurisdiction, and be really clear about that. And then, as I mentioned, establishing partnerships, development partnerships, but also probably financial partnerships if you're looking at projects of scale. So with that, I'll turn it over to Richard, and looking forward to some great Q&A as part of the conversation.
Well, Richard, as I'm looking at our incoming questions, our first one is related to housing affordability, specifically how much of the new developments would consist of affordable housing, and perhaps you and or the other panelists can talk a little bit more about what to add into that, what Jeff was referencing near the end of his remarks about the expectations that were forged with the community rather, when it came to housing affordability.
Sure, I can get started, and then Jeff, and then Helen, who's our housing director, can maybe also chime in as well. And so as part of our development review process in the city, we have a voluntary monetary contribution. And so as Jeff mentioned, and I'll maybe go back to a few of this, one of the slides, we have 4 essentially development blocks that are currently in for development review right now. And so as part of that review, we would be assessing the voluntary monetary contribution, which I think equals upwards of $13 million across the redevelopment site, which I think as we look to leverage those funds, it could equal about over 200 affordable units across the site. In addition to that, as Jeff mentioned, one of the tools as far as phasing and funding that was kind of built in by the developer, Folger Pratt, was diversifying the portfolio of housing typologies and housing availability. And so Block J, as we show here, is a building that could potentially be used for a site that could potentially be used for a fully affordable project, as well as utilizing the opportunity to build additional affordable housing on top of the dedicated fire station. In the city, we have an award-winning fire station in Potomac Yard, which is a fire station that has 64 affordable units. And so we think there's an opportunity here in the landmark site to do something similar, as well as looking at how affordability can also be built in or wrapped into the assisted living and independent living, senior living building as well. I can stop there and maybe pivot over to Jeff or Helen if they have more details to add to the project.
I was only going to echo what Jeff had said about community expectations. We have great support of our community and elected leaders. And in fact, there was already sort of an expectation that there would be a range of housing affordability. And, the partners were open to leveraging an opportunity at this municipal property, the fire station, to replicate what we had done before. That will require that the city be a financial participant, but it was something we were willing to do to reach what is in essence 10% of the residential development will be affordable in some way. And we think that's a really good outcome, and we're working right now to try to deliver on that. But Folger Pratt has actually planned for affordable housing in all of the blocks they're going to be developing early. So we're also, that's also been a good outcome of this partnership model. Thank you.
No, that's so great to hear. And in segueing to our next question, it turns more to some of the commentary on public infrastructure. Specifically, could you talk more about Alexandria's commitment to the infrastructure package that was associated with the redevelopment? What were the types of improvements that the city funded versus Inova or other development partners?
Sure. So basically all of the, and you can actually see it here. So one of the challenges for this site on Duke Street, which is the sort of bigger street fronting this property, there was actually a flyover, a bridge flying into the site. They are actually will be removing that and making it much more of an urban at-grade intersection with a median, pedestrian improvements, addressing safety, and also addressing the on-site. Yeah, there you go. And then also addressing the on-site infrastructure. The challenge with this property and probably many properties of this size is building that infrastructure up front, in addition to removing the buildings, is expensive, over $50 million. And the city will be reimbursing the developer, but we will get paid back. I would say, just in terms of infrastructure, I didn't mention this, but there's going to be a transit facility, pretty robust bike facilities, a lot of stormwater improvements, green infrastructure, et cetera, that we think are sort of best in class. So this is a way to incorporate things that we've been doing elsewhere in the city and also to sort of push that on infrastructure envelope. So short answer is city pays for it, but we get repaid back.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Thanks so much, Jeff. Just looking at time, wanting to make sure we get to our next presenter. We don't have any other questions from the audience, but I'll close us out with a more higher level question for Richard, yourself, or anyone else on the panel. You know, this was a complicated project, a lot of things that needed to go right, and a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong over the course of multiple years. And so could you comment a little bit, you know, if you were speaking to other planners who were similarly looking, who had similar issues in their community, or had a long-term, you know, replanning exercise ahead of them in some way, shape, or form, what are some of the ways that the staff and the Planning Commission, members of the public, elected officials, how did you persevere? How did you stay focused and find milestones and continue to work on this throughout the multiple years that it took to reach this moment?
I can maybe take a first stab and then have Jeff jump in. I think the ownership and assemblage of the property was a particularly challenging one, and I think the city was always kind of open and flexible to staying true to the core principles and the core planning themes that were identified through the planning processes of connectivity, open space integration, flexible, activated land use mixes. And so there were two prior development proposals that came following the 2009 approval that as ownership of one portion of the site came available, a land use concept came in of how to redevelop the site while still maintaining other portions of the mall. And so we try to keep those core principles in place while figuring out a creative solution that addresses the immediate need as well as the long-term vision of the site, while not forgetting what those long-term objectives are. And then as those projects kind of failed and more assemblage came onto the, like we re-engaged the developer community as well as the larger community on reaffirming those principles and then integrating them in each design. So I think we try to become flexible and nimble with the market realities of the site while still holding true to the long-term principle and vision of how we would want the site to be integrated into the larger community. But then really it came down to seizing the opportunity when all the stars kind of aligned. And as Jeff mentioned, that but-for clause, I think, particularly with the mall, the hospital wanting to relocate, this was kind of a unique opportunity for the city to now intervene and say, is there an opportunity here to do a partnership that would actually ensure that the mall could be redeveloped, and then working with the landowner and the developer there to kind of realize the community principles and themes into a concept that is actually financially feasible and practical and realistic.
I would just add a couple of key takeaways, and it's political as well. I think in our case, having the city manager be a leader in this project, because these projects take 5 or 10 years. And I think you need to be committed, and that involves the political leaderships, the council, in our case, the city manager, and candidly, our community. Our community kept asking us, what is going on? Why isn't this moving forward? We had conversations about it. And the fourth piece, I would say, for everyone hoping to achieve something similar, as Richard said, flexibility. The market's going to change. Things are going to happen. Decide the things you absolutely need to have and don't want to be flexible on, and agree on what you can be flexible on. And hopefully that flexibility piece is higher than the rigid pieces.
Jeff, Richard, Helen, thank you so much for taking us through the this year's Red Clay Development Award winner, the Landmark Mall redevelopment project. So turning things over to Jose Ayala, also with the City of Alexandria, we're going to take a we'll be looking at the Arlandria-Chirilagua Small Area Plan, which was APA Virginia's winner of the Commonwealth Plan of the Year at our award ceremony this past year. Jose, I'll turn things over to you.
Thank you so much. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Jeff. Yeah.
Well, again, good afternoon, everyone, and we are honored to have this plan in front of you that Jose led throughout this process. And I think we also just wanted to share as part of this some key takeaways that were sort of front of mind for us as we started this process. This is a neighborhood that's experiencing tremendous economic pressure from what's around it. And it's important, as you're thinking about your communities, to get in front of that from a planning perspective. Otherwise, you're going to sort of be running uphill. And so we thought it was important to get ahead of that. Housing planning based on economics. One of the things our council and our manager constantly ask us as we're doing plans is, this is a great idea, but how do you pay for it? How do you implement it? And I know that's something we get, and Helen gets lots of questions of, how are we going to implement this and how do you pay for it? And we're very real with the community about what we can do and what we can't. We're also going to talk about the floodplain and some of the climate change issues that we faced in this neighborhood, and also what happened when we were doing the plan. Jose is going to talk about how we did community outreach in a culturally diverse way, also with a little thing called COVID, and how we had to sort of navigate through that. And also, how did we focus on people? And that's something that the community and Jose kept using as our North Star. This community is about the people. And I think that's something that hopefully we reflected in our planning. The next slide is, this is something that we prepare, and I just wanted to share this because I think it's important, and it helps shape our planning and it helps shape our outreach. So the hatch lines is citywide, and the varying colors are this particular neighborhood. And a couple of things I wanted to point out, because it's important as we thought about outreach and how we interacted with the community, and also some of the policies that we talked about. You can see this community has a much higher level percentage of people above the poverty line, much higher level of foreign born and foreign speaking residents, and also a much higher percentage of renter population. And that shaped our beginning conversations with the community in this plan. And for those of you who don't put together sort of similar packages, I would highly encourage you to do this, because again, this shaped our planning process. And the other question that we always ask, and I think our city manager always asked, is, why are you doing this plan? And I think this is always the question I ask when we're starting a plan, is, why are we doing this? And the key issue that I mentioned earlier is the development pressure around this neighborhood. So the neighborhood in sort of the middle left of that graphic is the neighborhood that we were focusing on. And we as a city are building a new metro rail station. Amazon is coming in. Boeing headquarters is coming into Arlington. And this is sort of a region that crosses jurisdictional boundaries. And we felt it was important, if we're going to keep this culturally significant neighborhood, we need to do a plan and be proactive. And that involves other elements that we typically do in our plan. And Jose and Helen are going to speak to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the opportunity as well to be able to present our planning. So as Jeff mentioned, it is quite significant the amount of minority that you see in the neighborhood. And the question that we start, what is the preservation of culture? You know, that was something that we engaged from the beginning. How do we preserve this folks to stay in place? Consequently, the preservation of the culture overall. So the question came, what is culture? So when you think about culture, culture is the people who live in the neighborhood, and people bring their own culture, their own language, their own activity, their own food, everything that's related to that culture. Consequently, in order to create a great plan, we needed to make sure that whatever the recommendation that move forward along with the community are significant to make sure that these folks stay in place, a place where they call home and they have lived here for a long period of time. And not only to the preservation of making sure that they stay in place, but also enhance their opportunity to the culture to continue to stay in place and be enhanced as they come to the future. So when we start thinking about how do we do that? How do we engage the community? How do we come up with a plan in which we'll serve and we'll reach out to the community? We understood that in this case, we needed to think outside of the box. We needed to get out from our planning mentality and not saying completely out of the mentality of planning, but overall putting ourselves in their shoes rather than seeing it from our own shoes. We needed to understand that it's a culture that's thriving, they do well, and they live in a harmony with the environment that they live in. Consequently, we needed to make sure that with the way that we approach them, it is a way in which we can build trust with them. Because they don't, as you may know, working with minority group is usually a process in which you need to start building trust and figure out ways to build trust. So one of the things that we did, we decided from the beginning is this planning process needed to be conducted in Spanish first. And what does that mean? That means that every meeting that we had needed to be Spanish, and there were another meeting that would be in English. And consequently, in each one of those languages, there will be a translation, people translating. So the other folks that don't speak the language can hear each other. So we want to make sure that there is an interaction between the different groups, understanding their needs. We wanted to make sure that we go where they are rather than going into asking them to come to our meeting. We were there at 5 a.m. in the morning at the bus stop, making sure that they knew there was a plan. We walked the neighborhood, we talked to them, we engage in location they usually do. We at Ladder don't think about it like a parking lot sometimes, and as well as park spaces where they usually play soccer and other needs. We also understood that it was necessary to build the trust to go directly to the community leaders. We focus on those community leaders and making sure that we engage with them, talk to them, show them what we're going to present, and making sure that our message was clear and forward. So along with that, speaking in their own language, I'm just going to go with what worked well when we were crossing. As you can see, there is an image of the poster. We created a significant amount of poster in the area. We wanted to make it more fun and exciting for them, kind of like soap opera style, kind of poster. So that way it's more directly to them and they can see it as part of the process. So as I mentioned, certainly the Spanish, speaking to them in Spanish was necessary to build that trust, engaging with partnership with other community members and leaders in the area. It was important to achieve. We certainly, we wanted to make sure that these folks, sometimes they need significant amount of time, and this is not an easy process in which it's basically straightforward. We needed to make sure that we work with them and we were hand to hand on addressing their concern that they have. Something that we established as part of the planning process is we understood that these folks sometimes they don't have the facility that we have and opportunities such as sometimes computer, internet on their home, but they do have a cell phone, a smartphone. Consequently, this is the mode of operandi that they communicate with other folks. So we thought that the WhatsApp would be the application in which we're going to be using. This is well used in the minority group, actually, around the world of communication. So WhatsApp was a play a big role in the planning process, in which we basically sending information via text on both languages, videos, and posters, everything that we could to make sure that those folks continue to be engaged with us. This is a process that was started during COVID, and it started before COVID and went through COVID. So we find ourselves reinventing the way that we engage. When we try our regular planning processes, such as going engage, poster, and things like that, but we needed to reinvent ourselves to make sure that we address those folks in a meaningful way that will be facilitating an opportunity to be with them. So together with the community and the significant amount of meeting that we have, we come up with a vision for this area. We understood from the get-go, as I mentioned, and Jeff mentioned, that this is a neighborhood that needs to continue to be culturally and socioeconomically diverse. That's something that we want to do. We want to make sure that folks that are living there, they stay in there, so that they build a legacy and they continue to live in the area. To do so, as people are staying in place, Helen will be speaking more about how we did that in regard to affordable housing, the key component to make sure that those folks stay in place. We wanted to make sure that the commercial core that they sit in the neighborhood, that serve and cater to this community, and understanding that this is something very, very important for them, that they have everything within walking distance, stay in place. And I'm going to explain later how we did that. Also, we wanted to make sure that they continue. This is something we heard from them, that we needed to have some healthy and supportive services. They need to be within walking distance. We created a series of recommendations that will address those. And finally, as Jeff mentioned, sustainability in this environment. This area has been impacted significantly by cars. There is a significant amount of parking, so there's a lot of water runoff. We needed to address that and create a much better environment and build upon the neighborhood in a way that's meaningful for them. And with that, I'm gonna let Helen to talk about housing for all.
Thank you, Jose. And as the slide says, our goals in terms of housing recommendations were a very important part of this plan. During the conversations that Jose and I attended with the community, clearly housing and housing security were really top of mind for most people. And that was certainly heightened by the pandemic. The city was doing a rental assistance program, so to some extent, the pandemic was a positive in terms of helping to spur that conversation, and we were able to offer some resources as the process went on. But housing security, affordability were clearly sort of top of mind issues for the community, including their concerns about the economic development that Jeff talked about first. And I will say, it seems like this would be intuitive, but I would say something that I think really has been very meaningful in terms of the planning that the city has done is the work that our departments do collaboratively and intentionally on housing issues. So we've had a couple of planning processes that have very much had housing at the core, and I think that's led to very good outcomes and results, including our desire to keep the community diverse. So a couple of the key takeaways were that, the plan was very centered on preserving housing that currently exists, investing in existing housing, both to improve conditions, but also to expand what's there. And one of the things down at the bottom of the slide, what is the cost of creating deeply affordable housing? Well, it requires a pretty big commitment locally, but also sort of a commitment to exploring opportunities to leverage other resources. Because obviously, even going from a 60% AMI unit to a 40% AMI unit may increase what the city has to come up with by, $50, $60, $70,000 per unit or more. And then a very important goal of this plan was to come up with strategies and tools and training to help empower and protect residents who are typically very vulnerable, both because of their income and insecurity, but also because for some of the residents of Arlandria, their documented, their status in terms of being undocumented potentially creates an opportunity for landlords to be particularly predatory. So one of the results of the process was developing a curriculum called Ready to Rent, which will help residents of Arlandria be eligible for some of the new housing that's going to be created through tax credit funding. And then we're also working with HUD to create a preference, a housing preference for residents who live there, so that when new housing resources are created in the community, they will have an advantage in applying for them. And that's one of the ways, how we're going to try to preserve what is very important and culturally significant about this community, is that those who are living there now will have an opportunity to remain. And I think next slide, Jose, this is one that I'm really proud to present because it shows how our plan is already being implemented. And I think that's always a challenge, right? Have you created a plan that will stay on the shelf, or is it one that's going to be very dynamic and be implemented? And so as a result of some of the recommendations of the plan, we're already seeing really important work and progress in terms of housing affordability. So we have many projects that are already starting, including this project that's over 470 units. It's going to have primarily affordable rental apartments, but it will have a component of housing that will be for sale, and it combines housing with a variety of community serving commercial uses, including keeping some of the businesses that are already in the community and offering them discounted commercial space, but it will have a medical and dental clinic, city flex space, so that our landlord tenant services, the health department, our community and human services, workforce development will have a satellite in the community so that we are bringing city services to this community. We've also been very fortunate to get Amazon Housing Equity Fund dollars that have helped two nonprofits preserve market affordable and workforce affordable properties as committed affordable units. And those include, so it's over 250 apartments at Park Square and Park View. And then we're working with nonprofit partners already in the community to expand their housing resources using a variety of zoning tools. So one of our partners who's already there with 28 units has a plan going through the development approval process that will deliver 90, including 25%. All of the properties have 25% or more of their units deeply affordable at 40% AMI. The other thing that's exciting that's happened is that the city council has invested some of the city's ARPA funds in both enhancing infrastructure in the area, as well as in making much needed improvements at a housing co-op. So we're already seeing the fruits of some of our planning process coming to light, and it's especially exciting on the housing front. Thank you.
Jose, I think you're still on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. So thank you, Helen. So I haven't mentioned this, the tool that she presented are the key component in regard to maintaining the culture and the folks that live in the neighborhood. Once we set up that, the next process for us was, okay, how do we enhance the community to continue to be a cultural mecca for the city and an area in which people continue to live and have the life that they're looking for now and in the future. So when we think about land uses overall, we basically look at existing condition and the level of density and FAR that can be accomplished in the area. In order to add into affordable housing in the area, we certainly needed to densify, but we needed to make it in a way in which was sensitive to the existing development or existing zoning, and consequently making sure that it's an increase, but not to the point that will diminish or move the community to be completely different than what it is. And what I mean with that is sometimes we go super high scale or density or less or much lower. So we need to find the right spot to figure out what would be the right high level of flexibility. So overall, what you see here in the map is overall there is a primary residential. And then when you see the hash blue lines are still commercial, a more flex zone, I would say, in which they can develop either residential or commercial institutional. We want to make sure that rather than specify different uses, we wanted to make sure that it's an umbrella of uses that can be accomplished and also allow the existing commercial in the area to continue as they are, rather than change it completely. The red line, basically the section of the neighborhood in which if you go to this neighborhood, you will see this four of activity in which we wanted to make sure that continued to be the case. And we suggested there should be where retail should be continued or enhanced. Although we are allowing commercial to exist in any area where we see the hash line, our preference was to continue and build up that and enhance that core of the neighborhood. So in regard of land use height, as you can see here, we have different heights, and this is related to a sitting condition, a sitting zone, and then the bonus density, in which Helen explained that you can by right develop building height. In this case, mostly it's 45 feet. You're allowed to do that because that's your right. But if you want to take the advantage of densification of your site, you can do so by increasing the height to 70 feet, and that will call the plan bonus, in which if the developer decide to use that height, they are required to provide 10% of affordable housing at the deepest percentages. They have 40 and 50% or AMI, the Helen suggested. They also have another tool in which this is a citywide tool called Section 7700 that they can achieve an extra 30 feet on top of that. And that's at the third elevation that use the height that you can see here. So there's three of them. Now in the section, I don't know if you can see my tool. So in the section where the core is, as you can see, there is a constant 50 feet. These are existing buildings that while they are not architecturally significant, they are significant socially and connected among the community. We want to make sure that even though they have the right to redevelop, the owner of this land can be redeveloped, we didn't want to encourage them to redevelop further in the neighborhood. So consequently, we thought that it should be best just to keep them at the same height or not application of the bonus of local state rate. Regardless of everything else, they can use the bonus density. Something that if you have the opportunity to walk through the neighborhood, you will see that in the afternoon and during the weekend, there is a significant amount of street vendors in the area. This is not allowed right now with the city, but we thought that it is important to understand that this is a key component for the neighborhood. It's part of the culture. It's normal for them. It's normal for the Hispanic community and other communities to have street vendors. So we thought it was extremely important to make sure that these folks stay in place. Not only the opportunity of cultural connectivity and affordability of services and food and other means that they tend to sell, it's also the economic opportunity for them to be able to bring to the household other income rather than what they usually the type of work that they do. Consequently, with the idea that hopefully in the future they will become a mortar and brick store. And as well, this is something that right now the city is implementing. Also, land use are working on this. They are going to be creating allowing the folks to stay in place. There will be a process, and they're working on that and having communication with folks in the neighborhood. So when we think about open space, it's something that we heard very clearly when we met with them, is that open space is an important factor for them. A lot of folks in the neighborhood live in a very small spaces. An apartment, there are sometimes one or less than 2 bedrooms. Consequently, they live 2 or 3 families in one place. So open spaces for them is significant because they basically is a what we call it the living outdoor, the living space outdoor, in which basically this is a time for them to just breathe and get out and just have a time by themselves. So when we talk to them, okay, what exactly you're looking for, rather than tell us, but they write it down on a form or survey. Helen had a great idea of having drawing this. So what you see here in this slide, they're drawing. They wanted to have pool, they wanted to have other uses that can be accomplished as part of the planning of the recommendation of the plan. Certainly, they wanted to make sure that these spaces are active, passive, and social overall. So as you know, we have a significant open space to the eastern portion of the plan, so there wasn't that many open spaces to the western portion. We also knew there were some studies in which mentioned that this is a significant area, that there is a significant amount of children living in this area, so we needed to make sure that the parks are within reach on 5 or less than 10 minutes at least to walk to a playground or play space, so they can enjoy that without going into crossing the Mount Vernon Avenue. That's something that we accomplished. So every bubble that you see here with number are new existing open space that will be established, and those spaces will need it to be given to us by the developers, and they need to be available for people to use them as part of the public parks system. So in regards to mobility, we also, there was some certain issue of people crossing, getting hit by cars. There is a significant, some speed in Mount Vernon Avenue. We want to mitigate that and make sure that all the crossing and the safe intersections are being evaluated and studied to make sure that there is a significant improvement of pedestrian and bicycle safety. Not only that, but in regard to the tradition of the city to have a grid system, we wanted to make sure that there's continual level of connectivity streetwide, but also the walkability. And that's what you see here. Each one of the bubbles is basically major improvement intersection on smaller scale improvement of intersection. Not only with that, we thought it was necessary to expand the level of connectivity, not only within the context of the neighborhood, but beyond the neighborhood and Alexandria. And with that, Jeff.
Jose, I saw the time check. I'll go ahead and jump to the second slide in our conversation. So one of the things we talked about as part of this planning process is including health. And as Helen alluded to earlier, that includes uses in the community that serve the community, as well as the environmental benefits of parks and open space, as well as addressing the floodplain as part of this process. So high level overview, but hopefully we have some time for Q&A at the end.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Jose, everyone, thank you so much. I don't have any questions that have been provided by our attendees today. I'll pose one to the group before we head over to our final presenter. Just thinking about the broad base of different planning recommendations that came out of this, such a unique planning process, working so closely with a community that is, as you showed in your early slide with the community profile, very different from a race and ethnic perspective, socioeconomic, demographically as well. So once those planning recommendations were formulated, whether it was the open space, the housing, the commercial opportunities, which ones were most warmly embraced by the community? And which ones did you end up receiving pushback on, perhaps, that required the staff to go back to the table and re-engage with the community?
Certainly, I can. Certainly, the affordable housing was an area in which we needed to constantly go to the public and talk to them. I'm having to provide more information there. The expectation that they want a much lower affordable housing at 30% AMI. We did a significant amount of studies, economic studies, to see what would be the possibility. That was a challenge to do that. So even though usually the city goes 60% AMI, but in this case, we went a little bit more aggressive after we had a 40% and 50% AMI, 10%. In regard to what this, most of the people embrace, it was a street vendor, frankly, from both sides, from minority groups as well as other folks. They really enjoyed that and wanted to continue. That was something that was quite welcome. And then another area in which we not only outside with the folks in the community, but within our planning department is height, what would be the right height. We wanted to make sure that, sometimes we want to bring in a much more affordable housing to the area, but then we were struggling to the maintenance of the character of the neighborhood, how much height would be the right height. I don't think at this point we haven't resolved that. We're still debating that, but certainly we wanted to make sure that we stay at certain height in which it doesn't change the character overall the neighborhood significantly. There will be some changes because the neighborhood was already impacted by parking and asphalt parking, things like that. So we want to make sure that whatever comes to be developed in this section is sensitive to the area.
Yeah, and I would say 100% on both issues that Jose mentioned. I think the other thing is sustaining our communication, our dialogue with the community, and that is, that it wasn't just we're all going to get to the finish line of getting the plan approved, but how do we make sure that the relationship that we forged is continued? And fortunately, some of our housing work is helping with that because we are going back, but as Jose alluded, sort of managing everyone's expectations. Our city council was encouraging us to think very big. We did. So I think we're going to need to continue. This is a very ambitious project, the one at the corner of Mount Vernon and Glebe, and the price tag for that is also very ambitious. So we're really stretching ourselves to leverage non-city resources and doing things we haven't done before, which is exhilarating and scary.
Nick, I would just add one super quick thing that we did that I want to replicate in our future plans is from a process perspective. The community told us what they wanted. We gave them principles first to say, did we get it right? Then we gave them draft recommendations, super high level. Did we get it right? Then they saw recommendations more formalized, and then they saw the plan. So I think oftentimes as professionals, we tend to hear things and then they tend to get a plan. I would encourage us to take a little bit more smaller steps along the way to keep the community involved. And that was a big takeaway from me.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, that's really helpful. Thanks so much, Jose. Very thankful and grateful for you and your colleagues' time today. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll go ahead and shift over to Chesterfield County with Andrew Noxon and his colleagues. Chesterfield was the recipient of APA Virginia's Old Dominion Innovative Approaches Award earlier this year for the work that was done as part of the Rockwood Special Focus Area Plan. Andrew, take it away for us.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you, Nick. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Drew Noxon. I'm a principal planner with the Comprehensive Planning and Research team here in Chesterfield County. With me here today in support is our planning director, Andy Gillies, as well as our assistant planning director, Steve Hosh. We're really happy to be invited here to talk with you all today about our Rockwood Special Focus Area Plan, what we call the Rockwood SFA for short. So just a little info about Chesterfield. We're a county of just over 350,000 residents. The county has seen a lot of your typical low density sprawl development. However, our focus is really on an area that's really been lapped by the newer development happening out west and southwest in the county. Today, we'll be talking about an area developed mostly between the 1960s and 1990s. And with all this new development happening out west and southwest, this area really has remained stagnant since the 1990s, late 90s, except for some turnover of a few of the more auto-oriented outparcels in the area. The Rockwood Special Focus Area is located in a somewhat central location in Chesterfield County and is at the intersection of Hull Street Road, which is US Route 360, and Courthouse Road. The SFA spans both the Clover Hill and Dale magisterial districts, and that Route 360 Hull Street Road is the border of the two districts. So a special focus area is a long-range plan providing detailed development guidance to areas undergoing or having a high potential for change. This is the county's first SFA. The plan really guides future growth, land development, redevelopment decisions, programs, ordinances, and policies. It also provides strategies for redevelopment of key properties through detailed design guidelines and placemaking. And it is also a component of our countywide comprehensive plan. The plan area is bounded by Falling Creek to the north, Gregory's Pond, and the Amberley and Falling Creek Farms subdivisions to the east. We have a stream corridor called Horner's Run to the south. We have Price Club Boulevard and the Genito Woods subdivision to the west. And then we have a core area in the center of the special focus area consisting of the 4 quadrants surrounding that main intersection of Route 360 and Courthouse Roads. We really designated that core area as our main focal point for redevelopment efforts within Rockwood. So I'll start by talking about some of the challenges facing the Rockwood area. There are numerous individual landowners here, which really prevents the aggregation of land in this area into larger, more developable sites. The predominant uses in the area are commercial and retail. There really are a few employment uses in the area. There's no real industry here or any sort of corporate offices. Residential density within the plan area is also very low. We only have a few hundred units actually in the plan area. And so Rockwood lacks that critical mass to really support existing or future businesses in the area. We also have few entertainment uses here or open spaces outside of Rockwood Park, which is in that northeastern quadrant I'll talk about in a second. And today we just have a lot of retail stores with large parking lots, shopping centers that take up massive amounts of land, but don't really provide any sort of public green space. The area also lacks any sort of main street or any real sort of town center or a focal point for the area. Rockwood is sort of like the hole in the donut. It's surrounded by a whole lot of established residential neighborhoods. There's still a lot of vacant and or underutilized land right in the center of Rockwood. The area is also really dominated by auto-oriented uses. There are really wide roads, 6-lane roads with high traffic volumes. We have poor access management in the area. It's really a free-for-all when it comes to individual curb cuts and business entrances from those main corridors. Parking areas and drive-through uses really dominate our views from the streets. You can see in these photos large parking lots, and you see a lot of kind of fast food restaurants, auto stores, and that sort of thing. There are also a few pedestrian and bicycle connections in the area, and the area is really lacking any sort of streetscaping or landscaping scheme along these major corridors. We also have many vacancies in our shopping centers and believe this will only perpetuate over time as we see the shifting market for retail uses. Finally, the area lacks a real overall sense of place. Rockwood today is your typical suburban development pattern of arterial corridors lined with large strip centers. The area is also encumbered by many different uses, which make it really hard to develop or redevelop a lot of the sites here. We have extensive resource protection areas throughout the area. These really provide separation between existing residential communities in the plan area and also really deter connectivity and walkability in the area. There's also a major utility line, some easements, which are the one in the picture here, the large pink one that goes kind of northwest to southeast. That is a major Dominion high transmission line, and that's about a 250-foot wide swath that's cut right through the middle of the Rockwood Special Focus area. We also have multiple gas lines in the area, which kind of cut up some of these smaller parcels too. And then we also have a pump station down here in kind of the eastern central section. That's really a crucial facility for water provision to many of the area residents here. but also it requires a rather substantial security buffer that must be maintained around that pump station facility. So that makes it really hard for any redevelopment to take place in that area because you've got issues with that encroaching on that existing water facility. While we do have many challenges, there are also some really great opportunities we found in Rockwood once we got out on the ground. Rockwood has a fantastic locational advantage. It's at the junction of Route 360 and Courthouse Road. This is one of the county's most highly traversed intersections in the area. Rockwood is also relatively close to some of our other larger residential, shopping, entertainment, recreational and employment areas throughout the county. And also Powhite Parkway, which is one of our limited access highways, is just north of the SFA. It's out of this picture here, but that's a major thoroughfare that will take you right into downtown Richmond from Rockwood. We also have Rockwood Park in the northeast. That is that is our largest county park at this time, and it serves as a really major focal point for this area, and it has a real regional draw. People are coming from all around the Richmond area to visit this park. There are also many established communities just outside of the planning area. These neighborhoods at this time are relatively stable and still relatively affordable as well. There's also abundant land for new development, redevelopment in the area. Most of the vacant land is predominantly located in the northwestern, eastern, and southeastern sectors of the plan area. There's also some considerable underutilized land, which could be redeveloped with higher density uses in the future. We have a lot of large acre parcels that contain single family dwellings. And then we also have a bunch of shopping centers, which are truly overparked, and there's some room for some additional development on those sites or just wholesale redevelopment of those. There are also some waterways in the area. We have Falling Creek, Gregory's Pond, and Horner's Run. These waterways are great features which could provide some future recreational and educational opportunities. And then finally, we also have a pretty attractive market in this area. We did a market analysis back in 2019 before we really kicked off the plan efforts. And it showed demand for different residential unit types, including single family, townhomes, and multifamily uses. And then also there's some demand shown for more particular kind of boutique retail uses and restaurants in this area. So let's go next to the actual land use plan. The plan proposes a real healthy balance of residential, commercial, retail, office, and entertainment uses in the area. It promotes uses that are not currently available in this area, as well as additional housing options. It encourages a walkable development pattern with higher densities centered around that intersection of 360 and Courthouse Road. And it also recommends transitions and compatibility between some of our planned higher density areas and some of these existing neighborhoods outside of the focus area. Next, the plan suggests that higher densities and height should be located around that main intersection, 316 Courthouse Road. This is your sort of transect concept. We would have mixed-use projects that would be mainly along Route 360. And then the plan would also encourage some limited commercial and mixed-use development on the interiors of the larger projects, creating small main streets or a few corner stores within these larger projects. And then as distance increases from Route 360, the densities and building heights should decrease in order to better promote compatibility with the existing single-family neighborhoods outside of the special focus area boundaries. Now, next, let's look at how the land use plan could be carried out. Some of our healthiest commercial properties in this area are located along Hall Street and somewhat along Courthouse Road. A phased approach would really aim to redevelopment the internal parcels first, such as some of our major shopping centers. We have 3 major shopping centers, the southwestern, southeastern, and northeastern quadrants of the intersection. These projects would really develop first, and then you see in the slide we have a phase 1 redevelopment. So this is tearing down a shopping center and an existing golf park or driving range. And so with these interior projects, we would also expect to see some temporary buffers between existing proposed uses, as well as some careful attention to what we're calling our dimensional accounting. So making sure that our development is installed in a way which it leaves enough room between Route 360 in this development to allow for future redevelopment of these out parcel uses one day. This also promotes a grid pattern of streets, which would provide better connectivity and then also support a more efficient redevelopment plan. We would have carefully planned stub road connections and cross accesses, which would promote future redevelopment, but also still serve some of these existing uses in the interim before they redevelop. Then we also looked at having open spaces and hardscape pedestrian corridors, which would be developed within each of these new redevelopment projects. And then finally, we looked at existing environmental features on these sites, which could be assets. We looked at the area along the south of this site, which is that Horner's Run stream corridor we talked about. It's the boundary of the special focus area. We looked at how that could be made into a wonderful greenway and trail system in the future. So next, this is just a conceptual phased build out that we had in the plan. This is a full build out of this area over 50 years. You'll see that the larger shopping centers on the main quadrants really are the initial first few phases of development. And then over time, that puts pressure on the land values in this area on some of those out parcels to redevelop into something that would be compatible with those more internal sites, the old shopping center sites. The plan also suggests the creation of Main Street and Village Greens, like we said earlier. That sort of central pedestrian-oriented street or public open space that's surrounded by retail uses. Really looking to create a nice environment where you can spend multiple hours of your day and visit many different businesses and attend events. So this is not the typical existing retail pattern where you park in a parking lot, go to one store, and you're gone. The plan also promotes some additional opportunities for open space throughout, as well as some pedestrian infrastructure as new development takes place. One of those things about getting out and actually walking around the plan area when you start your initial research phase was to get out and take a look at what you have, what kind of assets you might have. One unique opportunity we found in Rockwood was the area around an existing drainage stream that's really unsightly today. It's culverted, and it really cuts a few of the properties in half. We came up with an idea to turn this into what we're calling a creek walk. So our idea was the stream could be restored to a more natural state, or it could be converted into a landscape pedestrian corridor in a more urban context, as you see in the picture on the screen. Imagine some outdoor cafes and open spaces lining this creek corridor, and then new residential buildings with balconies overlooking the creek. This really add value to this area. Next, I'll talk about transportation in the plan. The plan promotes the creation of an interconnected grid system of streets, which would utilize many of the existing traffic signals along Hall Street Courthouse Road. We would see parallel networks developed to better distribute traffic in the area and decrease some of the pressure that's on the main intersection of 360 and Courthouse Road today. And then also we would have what's down here in letters A and B, a new Rockwood Park access at the existing Route 360 signal. This would allow full access in and out of the park to Whole Street, whereas today we only have a one-way in kind of access, and there's not a full crossover. So as redevelopment takes place, we would also see the reduction in the number of those individual curb cuts along these major roadways like we talked about earlier. Next, I'll talk about bikeways. This is our bikeways and trails system, the plan. This entails the creation of bypass routes around that busy intersection, 360 and Courthouse Road again. And then additional access points to Rockwood Park and to new development from the surrounding communities. Plan also proposes a trail parallel to that Horner's Run stream corridor we talked about earlier. There's some real beautiful natural areas down there, and this trail would establish a larger greenway system in the area, which could be an excellent asset for this area and the county in general. So now we'll get into some of the plan's design recommendations. I'll begin with streetscape standards. Really looking for streetscape design that creates a safe and enjoyable pedestrian environment. The image on the screen shows features which would be provided for our new interior streets within some of the new developments. These would include on-street parking, street trees and landscaping, street furniture like benches and other items, street lamps. We would recommend the use of pavers or multiple textures for walkways and streets, crosswalks at intersections in the middle of some of these longer blocks, that mid-block crossing everybody always talks about. We'd also look for improvements to be typically contained within the street rights of way. We are a county that does not maintain our own streets. This is VDOT right of way, so we want most of everything to be within that VDOT right of way. And we, of course, would have some spillover where we have some of these larger hardscape pedestrian areas. So that would be okay for some of those areas to extend onto our development sites. On this slide, you see a truly uninviting major roadway corridor. This is Route 360. It is 3 lanes with turn lanes on both sides at this point. So you're pretty much looking at a 10-lane road here, right up at the main intersection at Courthouse Road. And you can see how that road could be transformed as new mixed-use buildings on those major shopping center sites and some of those out parcels come in. And these would include better streetscaping, include wider sidewalks, which are buffered better from the travel lanes, street lamps and street trees as well. Next, I'll turn to setback standards. I talked a moment ago about the sort of hierarchy of different street types and the designs for them. The images show here how buildings would be set back from some of our major thoroughfares like Route 360, as well as our internal local streets with new projects coming in. And setbacks should really consider the different types of uses and how they relate to streets. If you think about commercial mixed-use projects, they may be acceptable with minimal setbacks from some of these major, 5-lane corridors like Route 360. However, a straight residential product, a new condo building or apartment building may warrant some additional green space between the front of the building and the sidewalk instead of being right out where you walk out right onto the street. The goal here is to really provide a good relationship between buildings and streets while also still providing a safe and comfortable environment for pedestrians, even along these major thoroughfares. The plan also recommends high quality exterior design and materials. We look for variation in different materials, colors, textures, different roof line styles and designs. We look for special treatment for buildings on corners so that they really stand out and provide that focal feature or focal point as you drive into the community, whether that's a tower feature or a plaza between 2 buildings like you see in the middle picture here. We always look for parking areas as well to be located behind buildings in this area. So the focus is really on your buildings and pedestrian areas, green spaces, not your parking lots like we have today. We'd also look for our lengthier blocks and buildings to be broken up by pedestrian passages like you see in the photo down below. That's a pedestrian pass through. We also looked at providing flexible first floor spaces in mixed use areas, which are constructed to better adapt to changes in the market and then accommodate different uses over time. We often have our developers come in and say, well, we can't do a vertical mixed use building with office or retail on the bottom floor because retail is just not a viable use today. So the idea is to build out buildings with that taller ceiling height on the first floor and the additional buffering between that first floor ceiling and the floor of a residential use above, which could accommodate future resident or future commercial uses and maybe have residential uses on the inner. Finally, we're looking for areas where we could provide outdoor dining. So looking at those wider sidewalk profiles along our streets and also within open spaces. That's something you really don't have today. We have a few shopping centers where you have hardscaped areas that are under a canopy. They really were not meant for outdoor dining because they back up right to your typical parking drive for a parking lot. So just looking for better places to create a better environment for folks to come out and eat outside and enjoy it. We also looked at how to promote Rockwood as a place. We talked about earlier how Rockwood doesn't really have any sort of sense of place. When you tell somebody you're going to Rockwood, the first thing they think about is the park, but not the community around that park. So what we looked at doing was trying to create a brand and something that tells you Rockwood's an important place. We proposed gateway signage along our major roadways and at the entrances to Rockwood. You can just think of something like the sign on the top right that says, welcome to Rockwood, the crossroads of Chesterfield, or something like that. And then finally, promoting wayfinding signage, which directs drivers and pedestrians to destinations within the plan area or other nearby destinations. So next, how do we implement the Rockwood SFA? The plan recommends the use of county-initiated rezoning requests for that 4 quadrants area, that main focal area of the SFA. This really allows the county to, first of all, waive zoning fees, which can get pretty hefty, especially if you're amending an old zoning case. But it also allows the county to assume a much greater case management and ownership role. So really taking ownership over these sorts of projects. The other thing is we looked at incentives. The county would look at expanding current county tax abatement programs as well as performance grants. And then the plan recommends that the Board of Supervisors also not accept cash proffer payments for your higher quality residential development in the area. So today, developers are looking at almost $6,000 per unit for a cash proffer payment when they come in for a townhome or multifamily use. So looking at waiving those, which is a major savings when you're redeveloping a site. We also proposed demolition assistance, a fund which would help with demolition of these existing shopping center buildings. You know, you're talking something around $8 or more a square foot for concrete and steel structure that has to be demolished, cleared, and removed before new development can take place. That's a very high cost to developers versus the typical greenfield development we have out in the western areas of the county. So looking at ways to lower the costs of redevelopment of these major sites. The county would also consider future zoning ordinance changes, which better incentivize redevelopment and contain some of those standards that we had in the plan, like our smaller setbacks, kind of building design features, site design features, that sort of thing. And then finally, we looked at creation of an aggregation strategy. This would also assume an increased role of the county, different departments to work with developers early on their exploratory stages for a potential project. They really consider any additional incentives for projects which could aggregate some significant acreage in Rockwood. We also noted some funding needs that we have in the plan. We have a north-south collector road, which would include that new Rockwood Park access, allowing that full access and two-way vehicular access, as well as bike and ped connections into Rockwood Park. And also there are some needs for crosswalks in the area. We need about 6 crosswalks in the area at some of the major intersections to help get cyclists and pedestrians across Route 360 and Fort House Road. Looking at that demolition fund, demolition assistance for the major shopping centers to come down. Also looking at funding for that gateway signage we talked about at 4 locations along 360 and Fort House Road as you enter the special focus area. We also have a segment of the Horners Run Trail in the southeast quadrant. That particular route is not currently on land which has any sort of development potential. It's kind of between a shopping center and a neighborhood. Therefore, it would most likely need to be a public project because the developer is probably not going to install that trail. Finally, we have, this is an idea that came out of one of our board members years and years ago, and we're still talking about it. It's a pedestrian bridge across either Falling Creek or Gregory's Pond in the northeast, which would connect some of our more established neighborhoods over to Rockwood Park. Today, residents of those neighborhoods have to drive a really roundabout 2.5 to 3.5 mile route by car just to get to this major park that's just across the creek from them. So having that connection would allow such better access for those neighbors and not require driving out on the 360 and some of these major roads, which do have congestion issues today. Next, I wanted to talk kind of about why we thought this plan was unique. Chesterfield County applied this year for the VAP Awards program because we thought the Rockwood SFA was a really unique product. This was our first SFA. It really represents a new direction for the county's long-range planning efforts. The SFA is smaller and more focused than our typical special area plans. It has an expedited time frame compared to our previous plans. Some of our last few plans took between 2 and 3 years, just due to the size and scope and some of the political interest for those plans. The Rockwood SFA took 13 months from beginning to end, being adopted by the board. And we anticipate that some of our future SFAs could take even as little as 6 to 9 months, depending on the size, area, and whether there's a significant amount of residential development and some other factors. The SFA also places greater emphasis on redevelopment of targeted properties. This being the 4 quadrants around the main intersection, which we talked about at 360 and Courthouse Road, and those major shopping centers. We also recommended financial incentives, such as the relief of cash proffer, as we talked about, and demolition assistance. Previous plans provided some great visioning efforts to reimagine some particular sites, but they did not really offer any site-specific strategies or incentives like the Rockwood plan does. The SFA also included a less intense public process than we were used to with our larger special area plans. In this sense, we worked mostly with the property owners for the major shopping centers. Also because Rockwood is mostly developed with commercial uses, we didn't really have that kind of bond between the neighborhoods where we did in other communities. We didn't have that kind of organization between the communities to really take on a sort of community visioning process for Rockwood like we did in some of our previous plan areas, like I'd say the Midlothian special area plan that was done a few years ago. So that actually helped our timeline a little bit too. We did have community outreach. We certainly did a lot of work on our social media outlets to notify folks. We did have, this is during the height of COVID, so we first had a recorded, kind of pre-recorded community presentation we did, and then a month later we had an actual virtual Teams presentation where we had a Q&A session at the end. So we did a good amount of outreach, and most of what we heard from folks living kind of on the periphery of Rockwood was, we face the back of the shopping center. We're glad it's going to be cleaned up. So we had some good feedback about the improvements that would be made when revitalization happens and some of these shopping centers redevelop. Rockwood also was I believe the second plan we've done in which a market study was conducted as part of our initial research. We wanted to find out what the market would support here, or what was missing in the area, especially since we're witnessing changes in the retail and housing market these days. The plan area also spans 2 different magisterial districts, Clover Hill and Dale. Dale's on the south side of Route 360, Clover Hill on the north side of 360. This was really interesting because we had to balance the different ideas and visions of our 2 different planning commission members and 2 different board members on those opposite sides of 360. And then finally, Rockwood was really not a community-driven plan. It was not driven by our county administration. There were no specific political pressures or motivations behind it. Staff was presented with an area in need of revitalization, and we were really given the freedom to take the line and really run with it. So this is truly a planning department initiative as compared to some of our previous plans we've done. So let me go next to what's happened since the adoption in April of last year. We had our first rezoning request submitted within about 6 months of that adoption of this plan. This site is located in the southwest quadrant of the intersection of Route 316 Courthouse Road and includes one of the 3 major shopping centers called Rockwood Square, and also an existing driving range. This is the exact location of that phase 1 in the conceptual plan we showed from the plan document, as we discussed earlier. So the zoning request was for maximum 590 dwelling units, mix of 2/2s and townhomes, and allowance for larger elevator apartment buildings. Provides that grid system we were looking for of streets, smaller buildings setbacks, and street trees, on-street parking, that more urban development pattern we were looking for. Contains nice green spaces. It will also install the first leg of that Horner's Run Trail along the south side of the site. And it's laid out in a manner which would support further redevelopment of the adjacent parcels and some of those out parcels next door. This was approved in May of 2022. The board agreed not to accept cash proffers for this as recommended by the plan, which was great for the redevelopment costs of this site. And also a subdivision plan was recently submitted to the county for review. So this one's currently under review, and the owners are anticipating that as soon as they can get approval of their site and subdivision and demo plans, they will begin demolition of that shopping center. So hopefully in the new year, we'll see that happen and something new come out of the ground. We're also anticipating some other rezoning submittals in the area, some infill sites, which would really be game changers and better connect some of the neighborhoods to Rockwood that are now separated. So we're looking forward to those. We also received some smart scale VDOT funding for some sidewalks and crosswalks in the area, and those should begin construction 2025.
Drew, we have one question that's come in
Yes, sir.
for you and your colleagues. Wanted to, obviously a lot of attention to the public realm and public improvements with the Rockwood plan. Did staff or members of the community, decision makers, consider the use of a special tax district as part of the implementation for the plan?
We did talk about that with our economic development folks and our community enhancement department. They were really focusing on a few of our other areas at the time, so we didn't have anything concrete to bring forward with this plan. The idea was that a lot of these improvements were actually going to be made through redevelopment of these sites. Now, there's tax incentives and things will help some of that happen, but really pushing some of these recommendations in the plan to happen when development comes in.
Mhm.
Great. I have just one more quick slide and then I'll finish up and allow some questions. So thank you for that question.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
So we've seen some early successes in Rockwood and realize that the SFA is a tool that can be applied to many places in the county, which are really in need of some reinvigoration and some newer areas too. So what's next for the SFA? Well, we currently have 2 of these SFAs in progress. We have one kind of in the central western part of the county. It's called Genito 288, focuses on an area around a former short track raceway, which ceased operations a few years ago. That plan will be brought to the board actually next month for a final vote. It went through the Planning Commission last month. Then our second SFA is called the Ridgedale SFA. This is located at the area around Route 10, known as Iron Bridge Road and Shipping Parkway. It's actually in its initial research stage now, and we're looking to be developing that into the early parts of the new year. So the focus of that plan would be around a former U-Crops site that's been vacant for a few years. So once again, another good tool for revitalization of some areas that are in need of some love. So we'll probably have more plans coming in the new year as well. So we're looking forward to that. So just some final remarks. I'm really happy that we were invited today by our friends at the APA to talk about the great things we're doing in Chesterfield, and I'd certainly be happy to answer any other questions you all have. Thank you so much.
Well, we're over time now, so it's just been so great to hear all of the details and the information and the ins and outs on this project. I'm certainly excited to see how this process is being replicated underway in different parts of Chesterfield. I didn't get any other questions for the panelists. I did get a comment from your colleague Janet Llewellyn from Chesterfield Parks and Recreation saying that the interdepartmental collaboration was terrific and that it was essential to the success of the project. So I think with that, we're going to end on that note and thank our colleagues from Chesterfield County who is presenting the Rockwood Special Focus Area project that received our Old Dominion Innovative Approaches Award at our conference earlier this year. For our attendees who are listening at home or watching this afterwards on our YouTube channel, we do intend to send out our call for nominations for the 2024 awards program after the first of the year. So Jillian, with that, I'll turn things over to you to take us out.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nick, for moderating, and thank you to Chesterfield and Alexandria. It was a really great presentation with such important information to share. We wish we could go longer, but we are going to conclude. All of the presentation slides will be sent out. All the presentation slide decks, will be sent out to attendees in an e-blast in the coming days. And again, this was recorded, so it will be posted to the APA Virginia YouTube page, where you can also see other. Hi, Helen. I think you're muted.
Sorry, just waving goodbye and saying thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Helen, and thank you to everyone else. Thank you for joining. Have a good one.